The International College of Dentists is an honorary organization composed of dentists from throughout the world. The USA section of the college decided to record visually not only the history of the college, but also several leaders in our profession. Dr. H.O. Westerdahl, Secretary General Emeritus of the college, was selected as the outstanding individual to be honored with the first videotape. The purpose of these tapes is to recognize those people who have contributed significantly to the dental profession. How great it would be if we had G.V. Black on an audio-visual tape. Wouldn't it be wonderful to bring back Pierre Fouchard, the father of modern dentistry? Another purpose of this project of the college is to explore the qualities of leadership. What makes good leaders? What qualities lead them to the top? And what can we and future generations learn from them? This program in the series of Chronicles of Outstanding Leaders in Dentistry highlights the career of Dr. Harold Hillenbrand. Dr. Hillenbrand is interviewed by Dr. Richard Adelson.
I think it's kind of, it'd be interesting to me, Harold, in just to take a look at what's been really a long, prominent, prestigious career, to maybe kind of back into it a little bit and talk about a little bit about some of the things that you did before you became secretary and executive director of the ADA.
Wasn't very much.
Not very much.
No. Well, I was in practice 15 years with my father, who was a dentist. And most people are surprised to learn when I tell them that I had that amount of private practice, but it worked very effectively in the work I did at the ADA, you know, and they'd say, you don't know what it is to get your hands wet in a person's mouth. I said, I practiced 15 years, and I taught operative dentistry after I graduated from school.
You were part of a pretty big family.
Pretty big family. By today's standards, a very big family. There were 9 of us. And genetically, there were 6 boys first, and then 3 girls. And that about handled it from many viewpoints.
Yes. And where were you in that lineup?
I'm third, number 3rd. And we thought for a while there would be no girls in the family, and they came along. But with 9, to put 9 through school, and to feed 9, and to clothe 9, most of us felt that was pretty good size and ought to be stabilized, and it was.
And you were the only dentist?
I'm the only dentist.
What led you to make a decision about going into dentistry?
Well, I went to school with the son of a physician, and we talked about it a lot. My father was a dentist, his was a physician. We both took pre-medical, 2 years, and then came time where we go into medical school or dental school. And at that time, they offered a 5-year course in medicine and dentistry, the combined degree. It was one of Guys's early proposals, and it didn't fly. But by that time, I had started in dentistry, and so had Dr. Shane, who later became dean of the school. So we were in dentistry. But that almost led to a new career. We had come from a Jesuit academy of 4 years, Latin, Greek, history, mathematics, and so philosophy. Then we went to an arts course, and it was more of the same. I have 6 years of Greek and 8 of Latin, that kind of thing. And you go to dental school expecting it to continue in that vein. It didn't. It was a trade school. Obviously, commercially owned up until that period, the way most of them were. And we found it a very depressing experience and almost left to go into medicine. But we stuck it out for one reason or another. And I think that influenced my career a great deal.
In what way?
I thought dental education was bad. I thought it was demeaning the way they taught it. And I thought, boy, if I ever run to dental school, I'll make some changes.
When you look at dental education now, in comparison to that, have you seen much change?
Oh, infinitely better, infinitely better. I couldn't get into dental school now, and I certainly couldn't pass a national board. And I doubt that I could pass a licensing examination. Jay, well, in the 50 years, I'm graduated 55 years.
1930.
The changes in dentistry were the greatest that have ever taken place in the profession, I think. And certainly education, when I started in education now, education's kept. I think we have the best system of dental education in the whole world. And I'm very wary of that, saying that, because it's American talk, you know, and I travel abroad a lot, and I'm self-conscious about saying we do it better in my country. So I avoid that. But we're the only big country in the world, developed country in the world, in which the profession has a role in dental education.
One of the things that that you were saying was that the United States, the profession has a much greater role than some of the other countries, and I wonder if you could just talk about that for a second.
Sure. I think it's one of the most significant things about dental education in the United States, is that the profession can have immediate influence on the dental curriculum. Suppose, for example, we develop something in the area of nucleonics. I don't think we teach a lot of that in dental school at the moment, but we could get it into the curriculum next year. Go to the House of Delegates and then make it a requirement for accreditation. And it may take a little longer than a year, but eventually it gets into the curriculum. Compare that to France. In France, years ago, they had the requirement that you had to be a physician and then you specialized, usually without further training in dentistry. And they called them stomatologists. Well, they weren't very good clinicians because they had very little clinical training, with the result that dentists who were technicians or thought they were stomatologists or wanted to practice dentistry, they went out and began to call themselves dentists. Well, France didn't change that bilateral system, and they hated each other, the stomatologist and the new dentist, you know, until, late in the 1960s. And then they started to think they ought to train clinically trained dentists. And they did. They changed their curriculum. But they changed the curriculum for every dental school in France. They all had to use the same textbooks. They all had to teach the same number of hours in the same subject. That isn't lockstep, I think you educators call it, right? Lockstep education. Well, the whole France leveled off the quality of its dental education. Nobody could innovate, nobody could change, nobody could do anything extra, or the government scolded you. Well, that's the way it is in most countries. France is perhaps the worst. But in Germany, government is pretty well controlled by the government.
Would you feel that dental educators here in this country feel as if possibly the House of Delegates have too much control over the curriculum?
Oh, I am sure they do feel. But the alternative isn't what they like either. That alternative is either state or national regulation. And the only reason that they still let the ADA do it is it's the least of three evils, as a lot of them say. And we are professional men, we are dentists, it isn't a bunch of guys writing laws, you know. England, they have a general dental council, which is totally almost subservient to the medical general council. And they run dental and medical education in England.
You're really well versed on the whole international scene, and I'm wondering how that began to happen. You became...
Oh, it was accidentally, I think. I had just become, at that time I was secretary of the American Dental Association. We hadn't had a meeting during the war because the current secretary didn't want to retire, and he had reached retirement age, so he found reasons, usually transportation, war transportation, not to hold an annual meeting. We had a House of Delegates meeting, but not a big annual meeting. 47, I was elected at that time. In 46, I went to Boston with 2 staff people.
You were elected then secretary of the...
Secretary. The only time I was elected, because I wouldn't take the job if I had to be elected. That makes it a political job. You can't do that kind of work in a political atmosphere. So I said, if you'll appoint me, I'll consider it. But if you're going to elect me again, no, I won't take it. I'll stay in practice. So they changed their bylaws, and I've been appointed ever since while I was there.
So you were on your way to Boston now with...
We were on the way to Boston. lousy hall, you know. They hadn't had meetings during the war, everything run down. So when we called our first meeting, big meeting during the war, House of Delegates, scientific exhibit, the international people. I had friends there through my dean at the dental school mostly, and they wanted to meet with us. I was appointed organizing secretary. I'd never been to a Congress, didn't know what it was, and didn't care. I just had a new job of my own. So that's where we began. The international group had lost all of its money during the war, and I and some other people helped them raise, by private contributions, about $12,000. That paid for their meeting in Boston. They had a lot of Ecuadorian bridge bonds and Chinese matchstick bonds and stock. All went by in the war, so they were broke. And that's how I really got in. They asked my advice. I said, well, my board felt at the moment that we ought to have a new one. This had been business since 1900. Stopped with World War I, stopped again with World War II.
Abandon the old organization and build a new one.
Oh, yeah. Because international dentistry was largely a cult. More than that, it was a European club. They took our money, and they did from South America, but the Europeans ran it. French, Germans, Spanish. So they asked me in. I wasn't really interested. I had a lot to do in the American Dental Association. But I got active, and 1952 they held a big congress in London, at which one of my very close friends was appointed organizing secretary of the meeting, and he brought in television. He wrote that article that you may have read in the Dental Guide.
Leatherman.
Leatherman, yeah.
Right.
So he and I collaborated, and he kept me in it because I had enough to do in the ADA. But he'd asked me to write things. I wrote their constitution and bylaws and considered it part of my work, you know.
What was your sense about the importance of that, making those bridges to some of these other countries?
Well, I have two viewpoints, and I'm not sure that I had them at the time I did it. But in retrospect, you find a lot of reasons for something you did, usually the silly ones why you shouldn't have done it. But I felt that there ought to be talk. If we're professional men, and most codes of ethics throughout the world say that there must be a free exchange of information. Well, we were a pretty advanced country, dentally, more than others. We had the first dental school, you know. And I felt that would be valuable to other countries, and we knew something about it. We ought to tell them. And the other one was that I came to realize was we have good dental clinicians in practice in this country, better than they did in a lot of places where the dentists weren't trained or badly trained. It was an export for this country, and it was something that we could take abroad, and we could be proud of what we were doing, and they could learn from us. And they could install the system of professionally controlled dentistry, or they could do what they have done in so many countries, Eastern Europe particularly, having a governmentally controlled profession. We knew a lot about free enterprise, and I'm not real fond of that term. It's a popular one, and it's expressive, but I think occasionally we go beyond that. But we were an open profession. You could belong if you wanted to, pay your dues, support it, and it did great work. And some of this ought to be exported. There's more information in that ADA building than there is anywhere in the world about the dental profession.
Do you see the opposite going on as well, what we might be able to learn from some of these other countries?
There's no question about it. And the International Dental Federation, which is the international one, provides a medium of exchange. I was in Helsinki, and I heard talks on the preventive systems. Norway, Denmark, Finland. They're years ahead of us. They're years ahead of them. They put in the experiments, they count the kids, and they do statistical studies, and they can tell you which direction they're going in. Well, we don't have government-sponsored projects, or even many by dental schools on a size that fits this country. It would make a good statistical sample. We just don't do that. Government does a lot of that. Toothpaste companies do more. But we learned a great deal from the new sweetener that they're using came from Finland. It's the product of birch bark trees, xylitol, on the market. Very effective sweet. Oh, yeah. You can't learn from them all. Surely there's no point in going to Mauritania to learn Mauritanian. You probably have 2 dentists. But Sweden, Denmark, and maybe I shouldn't continue the list, but I'm willing to. The Scandinavian countries practice good dentistry. Germany, good dentistry. Switzerland, superb dentistry. France, down a little bit. Spain, way down. It's a joke.
Dr. Hillenbrand, I'm wondering about one of the things that appears to go on in Europe that I'd like to get your views on, and that's, it appears as if in lots of these countries, medicine and dentistry are closer together, where the education is tied more closely. And I'm wondering, I've even read in some of your writings talking about our sister profession, medicine. I'm wondering whether or not that's something that we could.
I think our independence has a lot to do with the system, the way we practice it. In Great Britain, there is no question, and they will admit it in private talk, dentistry is a stepchild of medicine when there's funds left over for research. They had a medical council which handled dental problems on the side on Saturday afternoons, you know, when they weren't busy. Well, the dentists didn't like that, so they got a general dental council. But if you attended one, you'd think you were at a medical meeting. I've gone to a lot of banquets of the British Dental Association and the General Dental Council. The speakers are always medics, always medics. It has a much stronger relation, dentistry, to medicine in Great Britain than it does here. And that's why British dentistry is not reparatively, clinically oriented. They go for surgery, good pathologist.
And
the same is true in France.
And what's your feeling about that? And how do you feel about that? Is that?
Well, I think we're an independent profession by license, by training, by public acceptance. We're an independent profession.
Dr. Hillenbrand, I have to comment on something that's absolutely spectacular, which is your cufflink. If this camera can get a picture of this, I think that's really worthwhile seeing. You may want to say something about it.
Well, when you're working for an association, as I did for many years, you pretty soon get enough briefcases when you give a talk, you know. Briefcases, I have a storehouse full. I'm giving most of them away. And then there are the societies who want to do something well, so they'll buy you a piece of luggage for $700. Well, I wasn't willing to do that. I was being paid by the ADA. I didn't need any favor talking with my business. So I'd either tell them, no, I don't want a gift, or I can't accept it, it's too expensive. So they asked my assistant, who was with me over 20 years, what can we do? Something. He said, won't take it expensive. No watches, none of that monkey business. She said, why don't you give him a pair of cufflinks? I had 350 pair at one time. I lost about 50 of them. I took them out to show a friend. They were stolen in the Century Plaza in Paris. And then they burgled my house and walked off with another trunk full. I have about 150 left.
Dr. Hillenbrand, I want to go back a little bit. And you talked about going into practice and also beginning to teach at Loyola and teaching in operative dentistry and physiology. But I noticed on your CV that you then moved into ethics.
Yes, I did. I moved into practice immediately after graduation from my father. I went through dental school and taught physiology and operative dentistry, as I have said, early. Well, then I began to get active. I was editing the Illinois Dental Journal, and I just didn't have the time anymore to teach mornings, 4 days a week, something like that. So I told the dean I was going to leave teaching. And he said, no, I'd like you to stay in teaching. I said, I can't teach physiology anymore. It's 4 afternoons a week. Operative dentistry I can't do. And he said, I'll find something for you. So he called me in one day and said, you're a good friend of Dr. Appis's, who was one of my instructors, professors. And he and I were very friendly. And he said, he needs to know more about dental economics. We talked about socialized dentistry in that day. And he's a busy dentist, and he isn't as up to the latest stuff. You read a lot, don't you? And I said, he said, how would you like to teach that subject? Ethics, social relations. Well, it's like asking an elephant to waltz, you know. You can do it, but it's awful hard. So I said, fine. I was then becoming the editor of the Illinois Dental Journal, and I had to read a lot anyway. And I wrote stuff on ethics, got very interested in the government socialization program, we called it then, which is a stupid name for it. And I just got interested in it. Then when I came to the ADA, I was up to it, to my ears. Because, number one, we were following medicine. Number two, there was legislation, the Wagner-Murray-Dingle bill. And then I had to know something about it. So I started teaching as an instructor in ethics and social relations. We weren't teaching ethics before that. Well, I began to talk, so I got interested in ethics, and with my college background and academy background, which was largely in philosophy and classic stuff, it was easy to get into ethics, you know. So I had the title.
When you look back on all of that experience in ethics and you take a look at today's practitioner, what's your sense about where they are?
Ethics-wise? I think the ethical code, not only for the dental profession, the medical profession, but for the whole country, has softened. We are less rigid in our ethical standards in business, in horse racing, than we were years ago. There has been a general de-emphasis of the strict classical ethics, and some of it was too strict. Some churches were too strict, you know. It was hard to live by some of the standards. They were just too strict. And some of the early ethical standards in dentistry were Hippocratic. They were based on the oath of Hippocrates. And they didn't really fit when it talked about death and death-dealing poisons and things of that sort. So I became interested at that time in trying to adapt the code so it had a little more dentistry in it. We were a separate profession by that time. And that's how I think I got in ethics and social relations, backwards.
I'm going to pull out something that I'd like to just read to you, something that you wrote, and let me just slip through here for a second.
I probably should disown it in advance.
Yes, right. Yeah, I think you may want to. I want to. This is something that you've quoted from Tawney, and this goes back to 1955.
Tawney, oh, the Englishman. Yeah.
Yes, and it says here. This is talking now about the essence of a profession, and it says the essence of the profession is that though men enter it for the sake of livelihood, the measure of their success is the service which they perform, not the gains which they amass.
Right.
And I'm just wondering if you could reflect now on our current practitioners and whether or not you're feeling as if that's something that's...
Oh, I think by and large, at least philosophically, they say I entered dentistry so I could treat people and render a health service. But let's face it, even though you are devoted to the health care of people, you still got to make a living. And an unsuccessful physician or a dentist don't stay in business, or they cut their service to the patient down so it fits what they can get for it. That's debasing. So I have no objection on well-to-do dentists earning a nice, decent livelihood for the care they give. But it seems to me we've gone a little further than that now, that we say, yes, we love to take care of patients and we're very kind to them and we do preventive work and we try to do the best dentist we know how to go. Prices have gone up beyond cost of living and a few other things. And I think we're shading towards the return of a living rather than giving service. That's a hard thing to say about your profession. I don't think it's as bad as it is in some countries. There's a little too much of that to suit an old codger like me.
And how do you begin to turn that around?
Begin to turn it around? You re-emphasize ethics. And frankly, I lecture at a couple dental schools here. I think I've noticed in the last 3 or 4 years that there has been a return. Look, I wouldn't be in your business, secretary of the ADA, politics. I'm going to go to a small town, raise my family near a golf course, build my own practice, probably in a separate building. I can drive there and go home for lunch and all of that. I hadn't heard that for 10, 15 years when they were all going up in the big high-rises, right? There's some evidence that they want to get back. And that normally gives you small-town ethics. And they're usually a little higher than a jungle like Chicago or New York or Philadelphia, just because they're easier to control. You know a lot of the people. That in itself is good for the enforcement of a code of ethics. If there are only 4 dentists in town, they pretty much practice the same ethics, wouldn't they?
Probably around the end of your tenure as executive director was when some of the FTC issues were coming up about permitting advertising among dentists, and I'm just wondering if you could reflect on that for a few moments.
Well, FTC has always been a strange government agency. It has very sweeping powers and a very long series of activities it is in. For example, it handles antitrust. This could be among banks, could be among grain dealers. It also could be among dentists, but wasn't until it brought it in. That was one of my concerns with the FTC. And so far as I was concerned, and I've watched FTC over the years and quarreled with it most of that time, they had no professional input. We were being over-litigated. The lawyers would write it. They wouldn't consult you until it was ready for the publication in the register. So you were always looking for something to happen to you, and usually it did. And they got into the licensing business, competition, antitrust in licensing, and we went through that period. Then they thought, by God, they ought to do it a little better. So they began to write regulations that told the dental schools and states what to do. You can't license a dental hygienist to do that. Then they began working on dental hygienists. You ought to change the state laws so they can do more. I have no objection to examining those subjects from a professional viewpoint, but I am an old man and not quite daft. But if they have the right to write for another profession about which they know very little about its history, traditions, customs, and education, and just write, you got to do this at the state level. And I resent the federal government through this agency controlling state legislation. And that's presently before the Congress now, as you know. And Congress is going to tell them you cannot make a state change laws based on competition.
I'm going to come back to auxiliaries in just a few moments, but I'm just wondering if you could reflect on what advertising has done to the profession.
I'm not sure that we have a real good sample of what advertising. You're talking of advertising by the individual dentist?
Yes.
I think we've handled that reasonably well. There's still a great deal of opposition to it within the profession.
I know.
I see a glimmer of reason, not an overwhelming reason, a glimmer of reason in the government's wish to open competition. Because there is no question that when you're the purveyor of a sale or of an item or a service, you tend to get into the monopoly bit, right? And I'm not sure I would want to say, and although I'm going to say it, that the health professions were a monopoly. There were some things that government ought to look at. It did, but I think it went too far, because in permitting advertising by law, they also made a big bite in the code of ethics. And I don't think that's ever good for any profession to take these traditional hallowed things that dentists and physicians live by and give it a real nudge, just so you don't have a monopoly or less. You can open that up, as we did with department stores, right? Didn't have to change the code of ethics, make a few changes. But fundamentally, the dentist is responsible to his patient. FTC tried to abrogate that a little bit. They were willing to make the hygienist directly responsible for the total dental care of the patient. And that's a subject we'd examine. I'm on both sides of that question. But FTC, I think, by being so arbitrary and so arrogant and so uninformative and never disclosing anything, did a real disservice in the health professions, not ADA alone or medicine or the hospital. They didn't know what they were doing, and they had a bunch of young lawyers who were paid by the government to draft. And let's face it, a lot of lawyers are liberal, some not as many as dentists. They like to be in the foreground. New legislation, let's pioneer something. We don't want to keep writing this stuff all of our life. Let's give the dentist a bust. So dental hygienists can do everything except cut heads off, you know? They write it up. Of course, it gets knocked down. But they love doing this. Not only in dentistry, they do it all the time. Department stores hate them. Manufacturer of toilet products, for example, I know for sure, hate their gut. They're not based on real rationality, which I think is my objection to FTC. Arbitrary as hell.
Now that you've raised that, I want to get back to a word that you used before and was starting to make some comments about, and that was the word free enterprise.
Free enterprise? I think it's become a slogan rather than a term that has precise meaning. And a lot of the politicians, when they're in the campaign, will say it in one state or one area and not use it in the other. Free enterprise is talked about a great deal in New York, but a lot of clever politicians won't use it. They'll define it, you know. We need this where we can do our work unhampered. But free enterprise is a slogan, which is why I don't like it. And you can never determine what the guy is saying. It's like socialized dentistry. Dentistry has been socialized in the Army and the Navy from the beginning of time in this country, right?
And the Veterans Administration.
The Veterans Administration is wholly socialized, same as in Russia, not quite. The people are hired, the dentists in the Veterans Administration are hired, they're paid fixed salaries, they are given pension and retirement programs. If that isn't socialized dentistry, I don't know what is. What I'm saying, in effect, all socialized dentistry isn't bad. No profession can claim to serve people without being social. Mm-hmm. Therefore, when you say socialized dentistry, it doesn't mean anything. All these visions run through my head. And that isn't what most people mean. They mean government control, right?
Yes.
That isn't what socialized dentistry is all about. If we could socialize so all the kids in the world and in the United States had good preventive dental care, that would be socialized, right? I'm for it. I'm for it. So you've got to, when you start fighting something, and this was one of the things I objected to in the ADA, they fought everything governmental, except specifically those things in government that would impair the right of a profession to render its service. They opposed them. We opened it up for some. AMA opposed Social Security. We weren't in favor of it in the beginning, but it seemed to me that it was inevitably coming. And I never understood the reasons why we opposed Social Security. It's a step into the field. It's a toe in the door. We're going to be socialized. They'll take us over. Well, I never believed that. They couldn't. So we fought the battle of Social Security, which was one of my early battles. And we voted it down 4 or 5 years in a row. If you tried to take it away now, you'd have a Bolivian revolution on your hands.
Just ask
Nobody
Reagan.
wants to give away unemployment, old age retirement, benefits for the blind. No way. But that was a part of growing, and the ADA had a role in Social Security. At first antagonist, and we accepted it before the AMA did.
Well, hearing you talk about that is what it reminded me of something that I picked out, and this is something that Leatherman had wrote in doing a little biography of you. But he quotes in here something that your son said in talking about you, and he says here, he's talking about Dad now, but he is bottom line an editor, not in the sense of a good hack writer he modestly claims to be, but in the wider dictionary sense of someone directing or influencing the policies and contributions of something. Was that accurate?
Well, I don't want to be immodest, but I was brought up, as we have gone over earlier, in a very strict classical discipline. Latin, Greek, English certainly was one. And I got good grades in English.
This was through your Loyola education.
Yes, yes. And then I got a lot of writing assignments. I had the Chicago Dental Society Bulletin, came out weekly. And I managed to write a page editorial about 50 times a year. If you don't think that's hack writing, you don't know what hack writing is. So I wrote a lot, but none of the creative stuff we were taught to do at school, you know. I made a little money writing short stories and poetry. But that isn't creative writing, editing a magazine. You got to get it in on a deadline, and you hope it's all right. But frankly, I didn't want to leave the editorship when I became editor of the Journal of the American Dental Association. And that's why I supported so strongly my friend who got into dental economics with me, Dr. Harold Hoppus. one of my mentors. And I supported him. He couldn't get enough votes. And that was a screw-up all by itself, too. We were good friends, and after the board couldn't agree, the board was anti-me, but they were worse anti-him. There were about 6 candidates.
This was the 1946 election for the Secretary of the ADA. Oh, okay.
So it went on for 5 days before the meeting. Nobody got a... He got almost a plurality. And we finally agreed. My name began to enter it, and I told him, look, I'm happy as an editor. I like to write. I'm trained for it. I don't know anything about running dental association. So we were having a drink one night, and he said, let's make an agreement. The first guy who gets the majority, the other guy will withdraw, because nobody in his right mind would take this job without a unanimous vote. So it was getting closer and closer. So I was sitting in there as editor, and shouldn't have been. I was a candidate. And it got down to 4 guys and 3 guys, and finally the 2 guys, me and Dr. Appus. And they haggled and haggled and haggled. And they finally took a vote. And we had agreed that the guy with the plurality, the other guy would withdraw. So they read the ballot. I had 7, Appus had 6. I sat there. He sat there. Got a little nervous. I sat there.
1 vote.
And he sat there. So I looked at him, and he said, let's go and have a drink. Will you ask the chairman if he will either dismiss the board for a little while or if he wants to adjourn for today so we can talk some more? I went up and Harold said, I'm not blaming you. What happened? I said, what happened? You saw what was happening. You were sitting there. We took a vote, and I carried out my part of the agreement. If you don't want to keep it, that's fine with me. You go back and tell him. And he said, what was the vote? I said, I had 7, you had 6. He heard it the other way.
Oh.
He went downstairs and told the secretary, then secretary, to withdraw his name. He withdrew.
That's what I just thought.
And then they came to me, and they said, it was only 7-6, you know, wise guy. And I said, I don't want the job, not 7-6, I'm a good editor. And they said, well, it ain't going to be unanimous. And I said, well, get yourself a boy. It's common sense that you can't take that job with strong support at the beginning if you haven't got it, the 7-6, you know, anyway. So I said, no, thank you. And the next day they came again and said, we maybe could make it unanimous. I said, that's my requirement. Do what you want. They went back to the board, and they made it unanimous. The first crack out of the box, the president didn't report they had a new secretary. A member of the board of trustees, who wasn't real fond of me, he became one of my closest friends. They asked him, what was the vote? And he said, well, we reported to you that it was unanimous. But he said they reported at one time, too, in another context, that the apostles were all together, but they weren't. So the House, he put the vote to the House, and if you read the transactions, it says Dr. Hillenbrand's name was presented for election. And in those days, they just raised their hands, you know. The vote was in doubt. So he said, no, we can't tell what happened in that vote. Let's do it again. And finally, he ruled that it had a plurality. Talk about it. I'm sitting there like a bump on the log. I hated every minute of it.
I had the sense,
that's why
though,
I got to be secretary.
Dr. I had a sense, though, when I read what your son wrote, that he was characterizing you as an editor even in broader terms than the fact that you did editing. And I have the sense that he sort of saw you in terms of your role as a person who was not only commenting, but helping to influence the direction of things.
I think he did, and I think it's the main reason he finally studied law at the University of Chicago. He never saw me as a practicing dentist. I was always in administration or editing. So he really never knew what dental practice was about. As a matter of fact, when I read even a pocketbook, I edit.
Yes,
I pick out the typos in the sentence and do this, do it. It's habit. It makes you a good proofreader.
Yes, he noted in there that if you had a chance to get a hold of what he wrote, you would probably edit it for him.
Never saw it. Never saw it. It was kind of cute.
One of the things that I'm always interested in is the people who influence some of our great people, the people who have served as models, the people that you've built on, and I was wondering who those important people are for you.
Well, one was my dental school dean, who was an oral surgeon, wealthy, part owner of the dental school. They were commercial in those days. He terminated his commercial and gave it to Loyola University for a fee. Dental schools were owned personally.
What was his name?
Logan. William Hoffman Gardner Logan. He always used the 3 initials.
And part owner of the dental school?
Yes. And became very wealthy for it. See, they brought students in, and they had a lot of students, regardless of their teaching faculty, usually. And if they were a little skimpy on something, they made the students quota higher, so they had to produce more before they could graduate. And those days, you had to produce so many $1,000s worth of revenue before you could graduate. They called it the point system. You got so many points for a denture, so many points for a gold filling. They were treadmills and money makers. Logan broke that relation. He had tried earlier with Valparaiso. We were part of Valparaiso. They didn't want it. Dental schools began to be expensive when they started cutting down on the work a student had to do. So I entered dental school the first year in which it was a part of the university, but only by title. Dental school ran the way it always did. But gradually, it's an integral part of the university now. But they weren't in those days. He was one that influenced me.
In what way?
He was a splendid politician. He ran dentistry in Illinois with the dean of Northwestern. He was a similar kind of a guy, and they fought between them. He was a politician, a surgeon, of course, which everybody admired and still do. Came to work in a Pierce Arrow with a chauffeur, unknown in 1926. Was an excellent speaker. Never really said much, but when they were in a spot, they wanted something. Logan would go. He looked like a picture of an oral surgeon, you know, and a man of the world. Splendid speaker, cagey speaker. A lot of influence with people. Although I think by style he was arrogant. He was rich and knew it. And but he also knew the other people had the votes. And he fraternized with people. Didn't want to pay teachers what he should have, you know. That changed when they got into a university. Logan had a great deal of influence. Well, he got me into writing more than I did. I was doing a lot of student writing. I wrote some things for him. I wrote about International Library. He had to give a paper. He was president of the International Dental Federation. And he said, "Do you mind looking it up, Hillenbrand?" And I said, "No, not at all." So I wrote him a 10-page paper on the library, run by 2 old women who are now dead in their 98th year.
Who is some of the other people?
Well, there's a lot of them. It's just hard to pick one. Good one. John Gardner, who was head of HEW,
Yep.
who talked at the dedication of our building. And boy, he was a hard man to get. I think he is a decoration to the nation. He writes beautifully. Secretary of HEW. He headed Common Cause, whether you believed it or not. Did a pretty good job at one time. He writes magnificently in an area in which I was interested, which was ethics, government, people, motivation of those people. I have all of his books in first edition.
This is something that I found that you've written a couple of times across the things I've looked at. You say here, Gardner has italicized these words, and now I read the quote. What matures is a system or framework within which continuous innovation, renewal, and rebirth can occur.
It's a definition of a dental society, isn't it? And of other societies, or it should be.
Innovation, renewal, and rebirth.
Yeah, that's what it needs. Otherwise, you got a stuffy old association of one kind or another. He's a very influential man. He's by training a philosopher, you know, and a lawyer.
And when you take a look at the profession now and you think about those words, that innovation, renewal, rebirth, what are the things that you think need to be done?
Well, I think we need to look at our government. It's been, well, at least 20 years since anything major was done with the government of the profession, which is the American Dental Association. Not everybody accepts that, but it's the biggest body of dentists. I think the government of the ADA needs very thorough innovation and updating. Mm-hmm. I think public health, dental public health in this country needs to have something done. There are little tiny countries, Sweden being one, Finland being another, Germany being a big one, that really have programs in effect to bring dentistry to people. We have private practice. I admire private practice. I did it for 15 years. It's a function we should never get rid of because it's the best way for a patient to communicate with his dentist. You're sitting next to Joe and you see him every time, and when you're working on a series of treatment, you can do more preventive dentistry, dental health education, friendship, business-wise, economics. You can help him over if he's got a big family, you do this and that. That isn't possible in some countries that are run by government, right? We have none of that. They come from abroad. Sweden, for example, which is a very well-developed country, and they'll say, we want to see 3 experiments or programs, effective programs, for giving total dental health care to kids. There aren't any. There aren't any. There's some who make a try at it. But when you really get down to the paperwork, it isn't total dental health care, including prevention. We don't do that. And this country is rich enough to do something in that area. That would be my second big thing. And I think I would try to turn the anti-intellectual, anti-science attitude around. The ADA talked for a while of letting its research arm go. We have an expensive part of that building with research, pure researchers, some pretty pure too. Mm-hmm. We maintain the Bureau of Standards, which has done great things for the dental profession. We have an input into the National Institute of Dental Research. But in the last 10 years, I think, there has been a tendency to say, oh boy, we need to put that into marketing. And research and library are the first to go, usually, when you do that kind of cutting. And there was a feeling among scientists, educators, that they were going to make savage cuts in the dental research program. It isn't a big program by a hell of a long way that we pay for. I would guess we pay maybe, with grants, do about $100 million worth of research. And the ADA provides the facilities and some of the people to do that. The rest is government grants. So it isn't all that expensive. I would fight to keep research as a very important part of the dental profession. If it weren't for some of the instruments we have today, we would be as affluent as we are.
Let's hold it at this point. I think this is a point that we might want to stop for a second.
Can we stop for a smoke?
Yeah, sounds like a good idea.
The question of auxiliary in dentistry is not limited to dentistry, of course. Medicine's been talking about it a long time. And the apprenticeship system is really the delegation of duties. And the unions use it for one thing, which is to keep a guy apprentice so he's qualified, and also so it doesn't have much competition, right? I think those are the roots of the auxiliary problem in any field. Well, early on, I began to question, after my own dental education, why, for example, I, as a student dentist, had to make the tools I used. Surely there are people that can make tools, and I never used the ones I made. I made 20 tools, and we had to mount them, use them as a criteria for graduation. And I thought, why do we do this? My training isn't in that direction. I heat a piece of metal, and I bend it, and then I sharpen it, and it's a steel that you can't put an edge on. You never use it. You give them away or throw them away or give them to your grandchildren. And I thought there's a lot of things in dentistry that ought to be delegated. In those days, we vulcanized dentures. We used vulcanized rubber. And you had your plaster there with the teeth stuck in. And you sat there hour after hour plugging this rubber into it. It was good work, exacting work. And then you poured some more plaster over it. And then you took it in a flask. You've probably seen the denture flasks. And they go downstairs to a furnace. And the guy should watch them all night. And if he doesn't watch them all night, they turn soft. And you end up with no denture, and you have to do it all over again. And I think, why in the name of goodness do I, with a reasonably good education, have to sit there and do this slavey work? We need auxiliary dental laboratory technicians, you know, almost unheard of in those days, good ones. So I got an idea about auxiliary, and it was a natural expansion of my thought to go from what I was thinking then about, I shouldn't be doing this, right? To why don't we do it in dentistry? Auxiliaries would be good for us. There's a lot of things. There's no reason a dentist has to sit down and write out a daily ledger as to what he did. 2 gold crowns, use ZZ gold and this and that. So I had the idea of delegation very early. It depends on what you delegate and to whom. And the requirement usually is she or he has to know enough to do the job as competently as you can, even if you... Prophylaxis is one in dentistry that does it. I'm not talking about all periodontal problem. I'm talking about a prophylaxis in the modern sense. There is no reason. There's no risk of death. There is no reason, in my view, a hygienist can't give local anesthetic if she's trained for it. And the training can be as good as a dental student. I'm sure a hygienist starting to give anesthesia is not much better equipped than the dentist is, and they get dental training now. So I have no quarrel about delegation of duties. I believe in auxiliaries. I think 3 are enough. I also favored the development of auxiliaries, good auxiliaries, to take away the system that has worked in other countries where there's a shortage of dentists. Real or imagine. They create auxiliaries. Canada had a shortage of dentists, particularly in the Northwest part of the nation. Each province, we had provincial licensure up there, created a different kind. One wanted a denturist. Others licensed them only to work in children's clinics, which didn't exist. Others licensed denturists that had been practicing illegally, they licensed those. Canada is a mess in the number of auxiliaries. So I came out rather formally, certainly internationally, that they ought to start with the dental hygienists with training. And then they wouldn't have all these people who were being trained by apprenticeship. We got rid of that when we got them. Then, of course, they were licensed by the state, and that's where the pinch, as I felt it really was. Dentists were afraid of their livelihood, not all, but some were afraid of their livelihood, of the competition. And we get back to bucks, the dollars, right? They didn't want a lot of these people trained who might compete with them. So the laws were so restrictive. You cannot place the scaler below the free margin of the gum. Well, I practiced dentistry, and I did. Who the hell can tell the difference when you're below the margin of the gum 1 millimeter? It's illegal if you are. Oh, they were so restrictive. No anesthetics, of course. Couldn't put hands in the mouth except with scalers. They finally gave her dental health education, and there are still people who want to confine her to that. No. I think there are many things we ought to delegate with a little common sense. I've had a heart operation, and I had a lung operation. And believe me, that's a lot of injections. Middle of the night, this little dolly would come in pretty. Say, you ready? Sure. Think nothing of it. And I thought, we're afraid to shove it in the cheek where there aren't any big arteries. When they're playing around here or in here, it gets a little tricky unless you're trained. It works well in medicine.
Is the issue then of supervision?
Sure, she's under supervision by a floor nurse who's probably sleeping, and by a resident physician who's probably downstairs sleeping.
I'm thinking now about dentistry. Is the concern about delegating functions to the dental hygienist sort of a separate issue than the question about whether or not there ought to be dental hygienists practicing on a solo basis or independent?
No, I really don't think so, because I think the delegation, the quibble about State Dental Practice Act, was an indirect form of restricting the number and what they do. It was trying to keep the club a club. Yeah.
I see.
Delegation, nobody can tell me that my lung surgeon has to be there when the next day they open it up, right? He comes in a couple of times if you're there a week. But I think it is irrational, and I use that word knowing what it means, to have the dentist in back-to-back or hand-to-hand, arm-to-arm contact with the dentist so he can see how much damage she's done by doing a dental prophylaxis. Did you ever hear anybody dying of a good dental prophylaxis? What is the risk to public health? And the delegation of duties ought to be rooted strongly in the danger to public health. And that means the health of the patient, right? Any other excuse for delegation supervision? No. Is a means of restricting the hygienist.
What chance then do you see at the present time, given the increased numbers of dentists and all of the concern that the profession has now that we've
I don't think we'll train as many, and I'm not going to say we should cut back. Because if you can do what the ADA marketing program said it can do, and which I believe will not do, is to get enough people into the office so you can keep on producing the number of dentists you need or think you need. And I think we're already seeing signs of evolution in that Emory closed. That knocked out a whole dental school. And I can remember when we ran around the country trying to get some states to put in a dental school, train more dentists. I am not fretting about the oversupply of dentists in this country.
Why not?
Why should I? If they have to lower their standard of living a little bit, the dentist, and some of it's pretty lush. You look at the income figure, some of it's pretty lush. I have no objection to it. I also have no objections if others want a piece of that. Right?
Do you feel that there ought to be more schools closed?
No. I'm willing to ride this out.
Okay.
Because if we get back into a new wave of prosperity, as we did for a while, I think the dental usage is going to go up. It rises and falls. I'd rather be caught with a reasonable shortage of dentists and dental personnel than I would be with an excess of personnel than I would be with a shortage. The shortage killed Canada. It brought government in. You can live with an excess, as we are probably doing now in this country. It just means shrinking some of our ambitions, our goals, our fees, and a few other things to put it in perspective. But with a shortage of dentists, then the public takes a role, and I said, I have a right to dental health. They don't have a right to dental health. They have a right to access to dental health, right? I don't believe this slogan. Every person, it's WHO mostly, has a right to dental health. What about a cripple with his right to health? He's deprived of that right before he can even see, right? In utero. So I like to be more precise and say the right, every person has the right to access to good health care that way. And under better conditions, you don't have too many people.
It seems at this time, given all of the turmoil in the profession, that there's a need for leadership. And one of the things that you said early on, when I think this goes back to 1939 when you were talking to Loyola people, you talked about the qualities of leadership are not developed out of such talks as this, but are the products of the formative years at dental school. You still believe that that's where the leadership is going to need to come from?
Well, it has to, because they're dentists, and if you're looking for dental leadership, it has to come from dental school. Entirely no, that statement is not what I would say years later. I think the leadership must come from dental schools, because they're usually dentists we're talking about, dental leadership. I'm not so sure that the formative years or postgraduate years of the guy, after he graduates from as an undergraduate, graduate, If he has a good, solid sound, that will be a quality of his leadership. If he comes in and goes into research, for example, or even into a specialty, that gives him another asset for the development of leadership. So that statement is a little oversimplified as I see it today. It's background. I don't think you can teach leadership out of a textbook. There's a lot of human element that you just have or you don't have out of a textbook. You can train leaders. I don't think you can make them. John Cody hates administration, which is leadership, right? Politics. People say, I wouldn't be in your political job for all the tea in China. That's part of leadership is politics. Most leadership is reconciling, making compromises, reconciling differences.
Do you mind being called a politician?
No, not at all. Not at all. In fact, I was, and perhaps still am, a dental politician. I think of politics, dictionary definition, as the art of getting people together. Alternately, and I think it comes from Gardner, politics is the art of the possible. What's wrong about that? All government is politics, right? Church. I have two brothers rather high in the church. I had two brothers. There's politics in the Catholic Church. Somebody tells me there's politics in the Vatican. I say, oh, of course there is. You get two people together outside a husband and wife, and you got politics. You got a political gathering. No, I don't mind it. I don't apply it literally in writing to myself, but sure, that's what I was.
How do you see that different than your concern about going from an elected official at the ADA to one that was appointed? And you were concerned there that it was going to make the job too political.
You would get in elective politics. And in order to work in elective politics, even if you're an alderman or something, you got to have quid pro quo. You got to do something, right? The executive director of the ADA isn't supposed to have any quid to give for the pro.
Right.
What could you do? Give the guy a plane ride or send him some books or something? No. There really isn't any quid pro quo except perquisites, usually undesirable, a lot of them. But in business, I can see it. And getting elected, I was willing to take, I was young and cocky, I was willing to take my chance. I didn't get elected, I'd go back into practice and teach them. No problem. I wasn't really sweaty about that.
And you did it for a long time.
I did it 23 years. And it was politics, pure and simple politics. That was the background of the work. A new president every year, 3 or 4 new trustees every year. And you get that balance, 7 to 6, up again, and you could lose your job. Yeah. And my successor lost his job, didn't he? He was inept at politics.
Dr. Hillenbrand, if you had to look back on those 23 years and kind of pick out the things that you're most proud of, what would they be?
I don't think that's a problem. I think the maintenance and development of a research program paid for out of dues money was one of the things I did. And we have a rather substantial investment in research over the years. It isn't great by today's standard. We wouldn't have the drills that we have now. They were developed. Ray Bowen developed the adhesives at the Bureau of Standards, now head of it. And he brought the adhesive in, bonding. We encouraged that. I had nothing to do with the scientific side. I'm not a scientist. But I sure had problems getting them money each year because they didn't raise their salaries. They were paid a pittance. Paffenbarger, one of the great men in dental materials. When I came in the ADA, he was earning $4,000 or $5,000 a year. And I told him he couldn't work for me. He thought I'd fired him. I said, you can't work for me at that salary. That's demeaning to the dental profession, to what you do to hire a dentist at $4,000 a year. Ridiculous. My lifelong friend, and did great work in metals and things. That's one of the things I'm really proud of. I helped, and I had no military service because I was exempt for most of the time, and the heart was already bad enough to keep me deferred. But was to work hard for the military, and I did. I was young. I was editing and later secretary. To get some rank for the dentist, to get equal pay with the medics. They could kill everybody in the platoon, or whatever they kill people in these days, if he was a dentist, he had no right to command. You were gone. No right to command. Well, it descends, you know, down the line, and we get to a private, and the highest private gets. Dentists had never been given the right to command. That was one. They inducted dentists as privates for a long time, and the ADA knew about it. Imagine a guy with all those skills. You know what they usually was? They were made something in the officers' club because they could keep books a little bit and do things. And then when we really got into it, then they drove us nuts at the ADA to recruit the dentists. We didn't even have a list at the ADA. We had to find out who the dentist. Then they wanted to expedite the courses so we could train the dentists in 3 years to get more dentists. And here they were running around the Army, Navy, and Air Force. We didn't have an Air Force all that much at that time. Army, Air Force, Navy, and Marines, isn't that the thing?
Yeah.
They had dentists who weren't doing it. They couldn't find them even in the Army. We got rank. I think he was finally admitted as a captain. We got equal pay treatment, almost. There were a few perks in there for the medics who were brain specialists and things. But we got up there. We got rank. We got regular promotions. We were allowed to nominate our own dental officers. I helped get the first admiral, first general. And the military service are a major source of the improvement of dentistry since World War. Military service is good now. I think they have splendid treatment for the regular military. Even in wartime, it's damn good. And they got into undergraduate training, and then undergraduate training. They really helped belt dentistry along. And I had something to do with that. Veterans Administration was a jungle. And they finally tied it up with academia. And I think the Veterans Administration, not as strong as it was, is still a pretty good example of, quote, socialized dentistry.
Yeah,
they treat a lot of people, yes.
So the research and the work that you've done for the military in terms of the rank, anything?
Well, the one I'm most proud of, I think, and it's no glamour to it, is the reorganization of the ADA as a corporation. I wasn't trained to turn corporations around. I wasn't trained in business very much either. But to take a corporation, I use that rather than association because basically you're dealing with a corporation, that kept its membership records in file boxes, packed so tightly together when you took one out they flew all over. And the girls would stack them up in the back. We didn't know who our members were. We didn't know how many we had. We were fairly well-to-do because they spent money for nothing. Salaries is about all they did. And the journal. Perennial source of its comfort, the journal cost too much. Well, I think I built it up until it was reputable. I came there with a budget of $460,000 my first year. And they saved some of that. We had a damn good security portfolio run by a dentist. The library was a mess. The bookkeeping, almost Dickensian, with a feather and ink. One guy running, he's the only guy, the secretary didn't know anything about it. But the attempt to develop that into a business, respected organization, a good corporation with good funding, good reserves, I think, because that started at ground zero, maybe a little below.
What about the ADA building? Do you count that as among your major achievements?
We needed it. I think it's a lovely building. We could have lived without it. And as a corporate endeavor, I think it was a good endeavor. The building cost $15.5, the last building.
$15.5 million.
Well, $5 million, yes. I have seen appraisals, and I'm not sure they were all for the tax collector, but the tax appraisal, which we have to do, get our taxes because part of the building is taxable, it has more than doubled its $15 million in 15 years. I wish I owned it.
Yes, me too.
I've got a lot of things, mostly in equities, that haven't doubled more than doubled in 15 years, and that hell in a long time, right? As a business investment, as a corporate enterprise, I think it was a good move, yes, and I rather like it. But I think the other reform, I fought for federal aid for dental education. That may be a bad word now, but the schools were lousy, many of them, and they were closing up, right? St. Louis closed. And I remember we had a big fight in the House of Delegates on federal aid to education. They'll take us over. We'll have socialized dentistry. I said, what do we do if we don't take federal money, let the schools go out of business? Then what do we do? Back to the commercial schools. The kids work their way through college by doing gold inlays. I think that was the size. I think I improved the publications. Although that depended on other men after the first 2 years that I was there.
I'd also like you to take a look at the other side of that, and if you could think back about what would you have liked to have accomplished that didn't get done during your tenure?
I don't think we ever did a fair share of sharing our increasing income, and it was easier to get for the ADA than for state and local dental societies. They didn't have executive secretaries. They'd take a dentist and he'd say, oh, Joe, I'll do it for 2 years. Then you get somebody else. One or two had executive directors.
This would be the dental societies at the state level. And
there were only 2 or 3 when I came on board. But I think, looking back in retrospect, that if we had treated the corporation as made up of state societies and local societies, we'd have been better off.
I see.
Than keeping it so centralized and getting all the support for the ADA and letting the state and local societies flounder. To a degree, that has been corrected, and in some states overcorrected. They're little ADAs. I don't object to that, but some of the dentists do. But surely you can't run a dental society of 800 members, to say nothing of 10,000, with a part-time girl or a part-time boy, right? And they were doing that. So state societies were no good. Then we got clobbered by state legislation, and the state society had to be strengthened. And we now have a grant and aid system for states that need litigation. We ought to have done more of that, of supporting state and local societies. We do very little directly for local societies. That's where people hurt, isn't it? Nobody ever treated a tooth at the national level, I don't think. I've said that a few times, and it's true. That isn't where people hurt, and where you pay them and the financing should be. So if we had decentralized more instead of strengthening the ADA, which we didn't have to do, I think that's one thing I would have liked to have done. And they'd be stronger.
Yeah. Anything else that occurs to you that?
No, nothing special.
Then let me ask you a sort of a different question. If you were first becoming the executive director today, what would be your vision in terms of what needed to be done? What would be your agenda for the ADA?
Can I go back just a moment?
Sure.
Another achievement of which I'm very proud, and I think the dental profession should be proud, of officially recognizing a therapeutic product when we recognize Crest. The biggest lumps in the pacemaker and a few other things was a result of approval for Crest. First time we had done it, they picked up some of the competition picked up some of my past presidents. It's the dirtiest political campaign I've seen in my whole history in the ADA.
Take me through that again. What you're saying is the
approval of Crest.
You see that as one of your major achievements during your tenure.
All you got to do is read the statistics about Great Britain, which is a lousy reparative health service, and see the government reports, which originally opposed fluoridation. They say there are 2 causes for the vastly lower decay rate in the United Kingdom: the fluoridation of public water supplies, of which we don't do enough, and the distribution of therapeutic dentifrices with fluoride. And that caused a blink in the public health service of Great Britain, who were among the last to adopt it. They thought we were crazy when we approved Crest. By approving that, we opened up something for the whole world. There was something to do. They don't have running water supplies in Africa. I was on a World Health organization, expert group, they call you in. Mine was on dental health education, about which I'm no expert. So I presided over the gathering, and I had a guy from Ghana come to me. And Doctor, I have a problem. You've talked so much about fluoridation. He said, I come from Ghana. 90% of our people don't have running water supplies. They have wells, some of them, or they have rivers. And he said, that creates a problem. We have many nomads in Ghana go into the desert. And he said, you know, when they're in the desert and there's no water around, they pierce the camel's water sac, and they drink from it. How do you fluoridate a camel? Ha, 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 big laugh. But it shows what influence it has. Obviously, the camel doesn't have fluoridated water, and there's no way you're going to give toothpaste to the deserts of Ghana. But that, I think, had the most impact upon human beings that you can measure and count. Dentistry as a whole has it. But when you see what's happened to the dental caries rate, which is a part of our lack of busyness problem, right? Fluoride and fluoridation of water supplies has drastically. When I was in practice, I used to see kids come in with 15 cavities, anterior teeth. Now you look in the school mouths, as I do occasionally when I'm with somebody, they're caries free, almost all of them. The caries rate isn't very high, even at age 6, is it?
You were starting to say something about a dirty political campaign. Was that in the...
Well, the ADA had the Council on Dental Therapeutics, and we approved drugs. We approved dentifrices only when they made a claim. If they merely said, we make your teeth very pretty, cosmetic dentifrice. So we never did any real work on dentifrice. Then we'd get a complaint. This dentifrice is too abrasive. It takes the enamel off the teeth. Most times it didn't. Then our boys and girls went to work in the laboratory, and they measured the abrasivity, the first to do it. So we ran along. We didn't have very many approved dentifrices who wanted to do all these studies just to get a name on it. Didn't mean all that much. And we'd tell some companies, you ought to give us your dentifrice so we can look at it for cosmetic purposes. No, what the hell do we get out of it? It's a lot of work and a lot of research. So they didn't pay any attention to me. And I had dentifrice firms come to me and say, look, we want no part of the ADA. You haven't got any more influence than the toad in the beauty shop. Oh, you have no influence on the market. We advertise the way we damn please, and you're going to say we got to advertise the other way. No way do we want you. Procter & Gamble, and I think with good management at the top, founded dentifrice. The work was done by Dr. Miller from Maynard Hines School, who found a dentifrice that statistically could reduce or prevent dental caries. They went ahead and worked, and they gave us all their experiments, and they were long and many, and asked us, will you look at this? And maybe we can get the seal. We went all over United States, Europe, to get scientists that we knew would be tough, and they were. Most of our statistics was done in Canada. So finally, the council got around, and they came to me and said, you're for it. And I said, what? We're going to accept, or ask the House. The House accepts it. Pressed as a therapeutic dentifrice. Unheard of. Impossible. Statistics were bad. We were being cut in on the money. I owed Procter & Gamble stock. Well, I went to my guys and I said, all I want from you is science. If you can assure me that you feel you're on scientific ground and have the evidence to back it up, I'll do the political side. That meant board and house. Well, I don't think I'll name the companies on this little broadcast, but there were two competitors, the two biggest makers of dentifrice. One had stopped its research on fluoride, and the other, which was Procter & Gamble and Crest, had gone ahead with it. And if you don't think competition between companies in the dentifrice field is terrific, you're wrong. It is terrific. So the other company went out and recruited the support of about 4 or 5 of my past presidents, got the money they needed for various things, The two companies went at it, and of course, when it hit the floor of the House of Delegates, they had rooms and setups with listeners to the wall. Oh, it was a real detective story. And I wrote some of the reports, particularly at the opposition, at the people who were against ADA, and we won. The story was a good one. We can prevent dental caries. Here are the facts. If it can prevent dental caries, we ought to control by formula and scientific evidence. The other companies who will be rushing in are in it already. And the House voted. But read those minutes in the House.
That's quite a story.
Oh, it is. The next day, the Dow Jones went up.
Yep.
The next day, Procter & Gamble rose about 35 points. It was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal about the new role of the ADA. Getting interested in science is willing to talk about it instead of keep it. We got $1 billion worth of publicity, but the market really went up. I didn't have any stock. But some people made a lot of dough in there.
Oh, man.
And they captured, I think in the beginning, 57% of the market. They were almost equal before. Crest came in with an ADA endorsement, and Procter & Gamble made money. Put on very expensive health education campaigns that brought them into the health. Brought them in on radio with brush your teeth, what your dentist does, you know. Well, it opened up a whole new field of what they now call marketing, and which we in my day called health education.
Yep.
And Procter & Gamble spent more to bring Crest on the market for professional reasons. They wanted to make money on it, and I don't blame them. Then dentistry worldwide has spent on all the television and all radio since time began. They do it in 1 year.
Yep.
Nobody can tell me that isn't good for the public. You don't make them draw teeth in order to do dental health education. You can do it with television, as you know better than I do, and with radio. It was a great boon to increasing the appreciation for dental health care was Crest. And it sure is effective. I'd like to see it 100%. We'll probably never have a product except fluoridation, and that isn't 100% statistically when you look at all the takers. That was one. Now I'll go back to where we were.
Okay. 1985, what would be, if you were now a new executive director of the ADA, what would be your agenda like?
I'll say it another way. I wouldn't become or take the job of executive director of the ADA unless I got certain commitments from the people who are running it.
Such as?
I would think, for example, that the board, which would hire me, would have to read the bylaws and agree as a corporation that they would be limited by the bylaws, that they should manage, not administer. You can't put the two things together nicely or properly or even legally, because if you are a manager, you're supposed to be critical of what the administration does and be able to go up and down on it. If you're doing both, you're pretty happy with everything. And in my view, and not at all reluctantly, I will say loud and clear on tape that I think the ADA has them so confused that neither staff nor the board knows what they're doing. As a result of the lack of this separation of powers, the House doesn't know what it's doing. The staff, which should be the experts writing the technical papers and stuff, ought to be able to advise the House. But the board takes those council reports and almost edits them or tries to or presents new resolution. How can you criticize something that you've helped write and do it properly so the House will believe it? And the House just doesn't believe a lot of things the board sends in it. Because some guy from, well, let's say, well, we have one from Alaska, from Fuji Island, will come in and say, I'd like that in there. Well, he's going to run for president, and you are too, so you say, okay, we'll put a sentence or two in it. No. You can't be objective as managers if you're doing the administration.
Okay, so the ADA now says to you, okay, we're willing to go along with that. What do you see as the major issues in front of dentistry that they would need to address?
The major issue is always legislation, of course. And we have to be geared up that we're not going to assume the medical position and oppose everything governmental. Some legislation is going to pass, to wit the dangerous legislation, which I oppose and the organized profession oppose. Rather, we look a little harder at how to live with legislation that gets passed. This tax on health benefits, right? That is being proposed. Government spends the money, gives it to them for health, and then takes it back and we tax it. It's irrational. But we ought to look a little harder at what is to be done in case of, what do they call it in Navy, damage control. We're always last after the legislation is there, then we scream about it because we couldn't beat it and thought we could. So I think we ought to look more at the impact both of social trends and of legislation. And I think we ought to staff up a little bit. The ADA is a behavioral science now and social sciences. I would strengthen some departments. I think we have some that are overstaffed. I would like a better staffing pattern. I would like to give the staff more freedom of action, that they are responsible for their professional work only to my inspection, not to my control. And certainly not to the control of the Board of Trustees. They're nice people, they're fine dentists, I love all of them. But they don't have the confidence where they're elected. Unless the state picks them. You got Joe, right? And Joe happened to be a good golfer. That's why Joe got it. That doesn't mean he can read a therapeutics report and say that isn't quite right and amend it, right? That's what they're doing. I'd give the commissions and councils of the ADA much more authority, and it'd restore their pride in doing good jobs for the consideration of the House. If the board feels tough about it, let it comment on it. Say, we don't like it. Then we'll put it to the test. The council and the councils are creatures of the House, ought to be allowed to report directly to the House what they want. The board as manager can report. That's the major change I would make before I was very much older in the job.
I have two more questions to ask you.
Sure.
One is, if, as you look back on your career, on your professional life, if you were to be asked to describe Harold Hillenbrand, how would you describe him?
Adequately educated man with professional training in dentistry. No potential whatever that you could see when I was hired as executive director. There was some potential because I had written a lot, and that's available. You read writes well now. But executive director was something I didn't seek, and I wasn't qualified for. And to know whether I could do that, that's a real good question, not only in my own mind, but in many people's minds. How do you read an audit, you know, and where are the dopes in it?
I think you're being modest.
No.
I think if, well, just to be fair, to get the record straight, clearly when people look at the folks who've made a significant contribution to the profession, to the field, your name certainly stands among them.
But I learned from the beginning the hard way, and this is why I don't like the idea of backing somebody. I was backed into the job. I wasn't really hired with the opposition I had, right? And I think I have a gene someplace that let me manage adequately. Without that, I'd have been dead.
Well, I think you'd get some argument about that it was just adequate.
No, I think to run an organization, you ought to have some training as a lawyer or as an accountant or, as Tom Ginley, as an educator, to bring a very high competence in one field to the association, and then hire the people under you. That's what I had to do. When I first hired lawyers, they thought I was daft. Lawyers, they'll take you over. Let them take us over. I don't know how to do this. Improve your accounting department. You don't hire a grocery store guy who might know something about it, but you hire an accountant. You pay him well for it. I could bring nothing like that. I had nothing certifiable when I became executive director.
Oh, except lots of leadership skills.
Well, I think I talked well and I wrote well, and with practice became better. and those are beneficial to the association. But I had none of the managerial skills. I have read up on management. I think I know something about management. I have a couple shelves full of books on management, the philosophy of management, and this and that. But that didn't happen in the first 2 weeks, right? Yeah. One other change I would, if I were hired tomorrow, I would ask the board if they would get more and more to the concept that we ought to be treated as a corporation. In the corporate sense. I don't mean not-for-profit. That's tacked on to the corporate status. But I think we need to learn from the corporate status some things we can do a lot better. The cost pricing. It's done still by the seat of the pants. They have better statistics than I have. We produced a publication. They said, well, we got to sell it. What do we sell it for? It's pretty nice printed. I think we paid a couple $1,000 for printing. There's mailing and postage. Let's say $250. Well, you know how they cost price today. They do studies 4 feet thick. We're not at that stage. We're better. We did no cost price. You know, seat of the pants. You know. Strengthen the councils with better people, not more. Better people. I think we're staffed about properly.
As a final question, most people who've accomplished as much as you have over your lifetime that I've met and talked to seem to be in the midst of almost as much work as they were doing when they were really actively involved, whatever the position was. I'm just wondering what you're in the midst of. There's
a major difference, really. I work, and ADA executive director is hard work if you want to do it, and that's why I retired a little early. That is hard work because there are so many problems, and always the money problem. But when you retire, you do it at your own leisure and pleasure. And it's a great reward of retirement. Somebody says, will you go out to Wintercote, Kansas, and talk to the Dental Society? We have a good dinner. It'll be in January. No, I said. Otherwise, I'd say, sure, if we can find a date, and I'd go down there. Traveling to Kansas by train, planes were grounded, and they weren't very good. It was a real pain. Now I just said, no, I won't go to Wintercote, Kansas. Bless you all. I know a lot of you guys. I'm retired. Ask somebody from the shop. They get paid. I don't. And I turn them almost all down. My principal preoccupation in retirement is reading. I read everything, even labels on brand boxes.
And edit them.
Yeah.
Correct the spelling.
I correct them. Look for typos. They actually spring at you. You don't have to look for them very hard. Music, I listen to a lot of music. I'm still heavily engaged in international dentistry. I hold no official, I'm a past president. I hold no official office. I don't attend their council meeting. But I know enough countries and things about countries. When you have to write an international statement, I can often help them in not saying something silly. Well, you talk about this applies to, there are 82 nations in there. The internal grouping of specialties. They don't even have dentists, much less specialties. So you write very sophisticated rules what to do about specialties in the United States. They're not applicable except in the United States. Germany has only 2 kinds of specialists. Norway has only 2 kinds of specialists. England is getting more. They used to have only 2. And you can look awful damn silly if you cart a statement to the World Health Organization where it really gets picked apart, where you're proposing a lot of silly things and want them to print it. It's editing, I guess. Editing and supervision. See, Latin America is a void for dentistry. They're not very well organized. They're not very rich. And they can use Spanish translation. No, I guess I better not give you an example. There's ladies in the room. But there's a word of a fruit in Mexico that means a genital problem or something. And a European is just as apt to know that. I didn't know that until I spent quite a good deal of time in Mexico. And there are things in English that sound silly, you know, because they're written by a Frenchman and then translated by somebody French into English, and then somebody takes that English and puts it into her or his English. By the time you get it, it needs editing, damn it. I spend more time than I should doing that. I like doing it, and I do it when I want. But you can get awful screwed up internationally with writing.
Do you want to leave us now with just some sense of your vision for the future?
Vision for the future? Dentistry is authentically and essentially a health profession. It's a valuable quilt on the pattern of social life, social living, and life in general in the United States. Dentistry has earned the capacity to speak scientifically for the dental profession in this country. Dentistry provides the best system of dental education in the world. I'm not saying the best dental schools in the world, because they're not all the best dental schools. But the system with which we educate a dentist is, I think, the best in the world. And I won't say the other, that our dental schools are the best in the world. Some are, but not all of them. Our research is ongoing and should be deepened. We have the potential structure for administering the dental profession at 3 levels, and that's difficult to do, as our federal government knows. That should be strengthened. I'm not worried about membership. If we render a service, we will. I can't worry about membership. We'll attract them. We attracted them more than the AMA did, and the AMA went down because they weren't attracting any more. It can be done.
Well, it reminds me of a title you've used through some of your papers, Days of Change, Time of Vision. So I enjoyed it a lot.
I'm glad you did. I enjoyed being interviewed, and I haven't always done that.